I am Eleanor May Harper, 75 years of age, and 3 months prior I experienced a minor stroke. Not a severe one, no speech difficulties or facial paralysis, simply a brief moment of lightheadedness, a shaking hand, and a clear directive from my physician. Living alone is no longer advisable for you. So I complied. My son Michael and his spouse Rachel demanded I relocate to their residence in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Only until you regain your strength, Michael explained, resting a comforting hand on mine. I had served as a court secretary for 47 years. I managed trial calendars, maintained accurate records, and communicated with understated confidence. I accepted their proposal with trust. However, within 7 days, my belongings were relocated to the garage. You'll manage fine here temporarily, Michael informed me casually, gesturing toward a cot and an aged trunk. I once slept here during my college years. It develops resilience. The initial night, I wore 2 sweaters in layers and drew a worn, thin blanket across my shoulders. The garage carried the scent of metal rust and wood dust. No heating existed. No window was present, only a flashlight suspended from a crooked hook. The following morning, Rachel's voice pierced the kitchen's quietude. Pay attention, elderly woman. Inside the house, you stifle our breathing. The garage remains the sole method for this family to exist freely. Consider it an evaluation. Should you endure the winter season, we may reconsider our decision. She struck her coffee cup down with such force I believed the saucer fractured. I remained motionless, my hands clasped in my lap. I experienced every single one of my 75 years within that quietude, a quietude I didn't dare disturb. They labeled it assistance. They termed it provisional. However, I understood the reality. My residence had transformed into storage for their containers, aged equipment, and presently me an awkward reminder of aging they refused to confront. The garage wasn't merely frigid, it was merciless. And during the 3rd morning, when Michael glanced inside and inquired, "Are you managing, Mom?" I gazed upward and responded, "Perfectly fine, because occasionally you pause. You pause for the appropriate silence to conclude. You pause for the proper moment to restart." And I was pausing not to endure the garage, but to depart it according to my conditions. That afternoon, I sat silently on the cot, the chill penetrating my bones. I pulled my robe closer, attempting to warm myself through memories. The courthouse corridors, the aroma of documents and leather, the sound of my heels resonating on tiles. That existence seemed to belong to another person. Now from the garage, I could detect muffled conversations through the narrow vent connecting to the kitchen. I leaned closer, breathing softly, and listened. "Should she perish from cold," Rachel stated, her voice quiet yet cutting, "we won't need to handle power of attorney. No asset transfers, no complications." Michael exhaled deeply. "It's preferable to managing this daily situation. You're unprepared. We must wait until the attorney confirms she's legally incapacitated." I blinked. Incapacitated. That term hit more severely than the cold. They weren't simply being cruel. They were scheming. I had devoted my life to filing documents, processing orders, proofreading sworn statements word by word. I understood legal terminology. I recognized their actions. They were constructing a case, a deliberate, methodical one frozen evening at a time. And while I rested beneath a blanket transparent enough to see through, they discussed methods to eliminate me. The insult didn't sting. It was the planning, the computation, the presumption that I wouldn't realize, that I would remain there growing older, colder, weaker, and they'd claim everything while calling it mercy. I pressed my ear against the vent again, attempting to maintain composure. Michael's voice irritated. "We cannot proceed until the physicians confirm it. Mental confusion, memory loss. That's all we require." Rachel chuckled. "She's obstinate, but if she falters even once, we submit the paperwork." I closed my eyes. The chill was no longer merely physical. It was something more profound, a revelation. They weren't waiting for my recovery. They were waiting for my decline. That evening, I didn't rest. I lay still, observing shadows move across the ceiling beams. I wasn't frightened. I was contemplating how people mistake quietness for frailty, about how silence doesn't equal surrender, and about how if they desired my disappearance, they had selected the incorrect woman. I wasn't prepared to battle, not yet, but I was finished tolerating. I would listen, I would observe, I would wait, and when the moment arrived, I would recall everything. Because what they didn't realize was this: I hadn't forgotten my identity. I remained Eleanor Harper, and I still understood exactly what justice sounded like. My granddaughter Maddie presented me the watch to Christmases past, a polished silver band with a small digital display. It monitors your steps, tracks your heart rate, and records when you need it to, she explained proudly. At that time, I smiled. I wore it daily, primarily from affection for her. But now, sitting alone in a garage while being conspired against, I viewed it differently. That evening, after I heard Michael and Rachel whispering through the vent once more, laughing about whether I'd survive the winter, I pressed the screen 3 times. It flashed red recording. The following morning, I said nothing. Rachel passed the garage door without looking inside. Michael refilled his coffee and mumbled something about the heater remaining broken. I nodded. I waited. Later that day, Michael's former college friend Sam visited. I could hear their laughter through the kitchen wall. "She's still outside?" Sam asked, surprised. "In the garage," Michael confirmed. "We had to take action. She was excessive. That house has belonged to us since our marriage, just lacking the documentation." Rachel's voice followed. "The garage is the only location where she can die without inconveniencing anyone." They all laughed. I pressed the watch again. Another recording, another file. By that evening, I had 3 saved clips, each one clear voices, names, context. I knew my necessary actions. I accessed the garage's backup internet connection, a secondary line I had funded years ago when I financed their renovation. Michael was unaware I maintained it actively. I retrieved my old tablet from my suitcase, still wrapped in a sweater. It required 5 minutes to upload the audio files. Then I composed a message to Frances. Frances Ditt, my former colleague from family court. We had worked together for 2 decades. She possessed a mind like a strongbox and a heart that never yielded under pressure. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 10 years, but she answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd finally cease being polite," she said without hesitation. "I have something," I told her. "I expected you would." I emailed her the recordings within minutes, she replied. "Received them. You're not alone. Remain steady. This will progress rapidly." That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt warmth, not from a blanket or a heater, from purpose, from power, from knowing I had converted their cruelty into evidence. They believed I was merely surviving, but I was constructing a case, and when justice prepares itself, it doesn't knock. It enters directly. The morning of the 3rd day, I didn't tremble. I hadn't slept, but it wasn't from exhaustion. It was from readiness. The type that used to settle in my bones when I arrived at the courthouse before dawn. Black coffee in hand, docket sheets tucked under my arm. I wore my navy wool coat, the one Charles gave me the Christmas before his passing. I brushed my hair, added a little color to my cheeks, and tucked a thick yellow envelope under my arm like it was just another file destined for the judge's bench. I didn't knock on the kitchen door. I entered. Michael was standing at the counter, stirring milk into his cereal, shirtless, humming as if nothing in the world was wrong. Rachel leaned by the sink, scrolling on her phone, her robe tied loosely. I stepped to the room's center and placed the envelope on the table. Deliberate, quiet. They both looked up. "What's that?" Michael asked, not bothering to conceal his irritation. I didn't respond. I folded my hands and waited. He grabbed the envelope, tore it open like junk mail, and began to read. And then he stopped. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened. He read the heading again. "Notice of legal complaint. Filed." Rachel looked up. "What is it?" Michael's voice dropped. "She filed a lawsuit." "Against whom?" Rachel asked. Michael didn't speak, so I did. "Plaintiff Eleanor May Harper," I said steadily. "Defendants Michael Stephen Harper and Rachel Lynn Harper filed under the Court of Common Pleas with emergency injunction and a motion to freeze financial assets." Michael slammed the envelope on the table. "This is absurd," he snapped. "You're my mother, and you place me in a garage to die," I replied. Rachel laughed nervously. "You can't be serious." Just then, the front door opened. Frances walked in, sharp as ever in a tailored gray coat. Beside her was a court officer, clipboard in hand. "Michael Harper," the officer said. He stood frozen. "You've been served," the officer continued. "You are prohibited from contacting, residing with, or managing any financial or legal affairs of Eleanor Harper." Rachel's mug slipped from her hand and shattered. "What is this?" she cried. "Elder abuse," Frances answered, "and financial coercion." The court has granted temporary protection and frozen your access. Michael started to argue, but the officer raised his hand. You are advised not to speak further. This is now a legal matter. I stepped forward 1 inch, steady and sure. You thought I didn't notice. You thought I couldn't act. You thought I was weak. I looked at them both. You were wrong. They said nothing. By the hour's end, they were packing their bags. The officer stayed to oversee the process. Francis stayed with me, and I finally sat at the kitchen table. The one they once said wasn't mine. I opened the window and let the cold air in. Not because I had to, but because I could. News travels swiftly in a town like Harrisburg. 2 days after Michael and Rachel departed, a journalist named Terry called Francis. I remembered her from courthouse days. She had a gentle voice and a sharper instinct than most lawyers. She wanted to verify a story she had heard about a retired court clerk who filed a restraining order against her own son. I heard it was accomplished in under 12 hours, she said. That almost never occurs. Francis nodded because almost no one comes prepared like Eleanor Harper. Terry asked if I would speak. I said yes. We met at Francis's office. I told my story without tears, without dramatics, just the facts. The garage, the cold, the recordings, the plan for guardianship, the laughter behind the wall. The next morning, the headline ran on the front page of the Harrisburg Daily. Mother sleeps in garage, takes son to court and wins. The subheading read, retired clerk files elder abuse charges after being forced into freezing conditions. Evidence includes hidden recordings and retired judge testimony. They used a photo Terry took of me standing on the courthouse steps in my navy coat. Eyes sharp, face calm. By Friday, the regional news had picked it up. Local radio discussed it. Letters started arriving. Handwritten ones from women I had never met. One was from a woman in Pittsburgh who'd been sleeping in her basement for 6 months while her daughter told friends she was traveling. Another from a widow in Ohio who said, "You reminded me that being quiet doesn't mean being helpless. Each night I made tea, played soft music, and sat by the window replying to as many letters as I could. Not because I wanted attention, but because I knew what it meant to feel invisible. I knew what it meant to be erased behind a closed door or worse, a garage wall. And now, for the first time, people were listening. Not to my suffering, but to my survival. Because I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was holding space for theirs. The consequences came faster than Francis predicted. Within a week of the article's release, the church Michael and Rachel had attended for over a decade held a private board meeting. Concerned members had called, sent copies of the news clipping, quoted Rachel's words verbatim. The pastor called me personally. He violated the moral trust we expect of our stewards, he said. We've removed him from the community leadership board, effective immediately. But that was just the beginning. The Pennsylvania Department of Aging launched a formal inquiry into my case. An investigator was assigned and every recording I submitted was entered into evidence: audio, video, timestamps, names. It was more than sufficient. As part of the investigation, Rachel's parental rights were reviewed, especially after the line she said during one of the recordings made it into nearly every article. The garage is the only place she can die and not inconvenience anyone. Rachel tried to claim it was taken out of context, but the full context only made it worse. After a court-ordered evaluation, her custodial rights were suspended temporarily. My granddaughter Maddie was placed in the care of Rachel's sister. I wasn't at the courthouse that day. I didn't need to be. Frances called me afterward. It's done, she said simply. She's out. There was no satisfaction in hearing that a mother had lost custody of her child. None. But there was justice in watching someone be held accountable for thinking another woman's life was disposable. Later that month, I was invited to speak at a seminar titled Power and Quiet Resistance. The audience was full of women, young, old, in suits and sweaters. I stood at the podium and looked out at their faces, all leaning forward, all waiting. I said, I am not loud. I was never the loud one. I took notes. I scheduled hearings. I organized the truth into neat folders and handed it to men who got the credit. But I never forgot how to speak. I just waited for when it mattered. They put me in a garage and called it generosity. But I recorded their cruelty and I gave it to justice. Not for revenge, but so that the next woman wouldn't be alone. Not ever again. After everything settled, after the restraining orders, the headlines, the seminar invitations, I began to write letters not to lawyers, not to reporters, to them. to Michael, to Rachel, and to my granddaughter, Maddie. I didn't write out of anger. I wrote out of clarity, out of a need to put truth on paper where no one could twist it. Michael's letter was 3 pages, typed neatly on my old stationery. I began with the line, "You stopped calling me mom long before the garage," I reminded him of the summer I worked overtime to buy him his first suit for debate team. How I learned to drive again at 60 just to take him to his college interviews when his father was in the hospital. I never asked you for repayment, I wrote, only for respect. Then I added, when you placed me in that garage, you didn't just fail as a son. You failed as a man entrusted with memory. I ended without venom, but without forgiveness. You may rebuild your life, I said, but not with my silence. That is no longer yours to keep. Rachel's letter was short. You laughed about where I might die, I wrote. I hope you remember that sound every time your daughter asks where her grandma is. And then there was Maddie. She was only 12 when it happened, old enough to notice, too young to understand. She had slipped a folded card under the garage door on the second night. I still have it. I'm sorry if I was mean. I love you, Maddie. I didn't answer then, but now I wrote, Maddie, you did nothing wrong. The silence between us was never your fault. One day, when you're ready, ask me everything and I will tell you the truth. I signed it simply, with love, always and unshakably, Grandma. I never moved back into the house in Harrisburg. After the court ruled in my favor and restored my legal ownership, I had the title reprinted with only my name on it. Michael and Rachel contested briefly, but the judge reviewed the original documents they had tried to manipulate and declared them null. Coercion, fraud, abuse of position. Their names were erased, but I didn't want the house anymore. Too many echoes. Instead, I met with a young couple, Daniel and Rena, who were caring for Rena's mother, a retired nurse who used a wheelchair. I saw them push her gently up the ramp. I watched them ask if she was warm enough, comfortable enough. I knew they were the right tenants. I rented the house to them for $1 a month. Every other dollar goes into the fund I created. Justice and silence. It's not a large organization yet, but it has a clear purpose: emergency, legal and emotional support for elderly individuals quietly suffering in their own families. We're not talking about broken bones. We're talking about the kind of betrayal that leaves no marks. The kind where a woman is left in a garage with no coat and no one notices. I now work with lawyers, social workers, and volunteers. We take calls. We help people document. We remind them, you are not crazy. You are not alone. To launch the foundation, we filmed a short video in my apartment. I looked straight into the camera and said, they thought I was just an old woman who didn't understand. But I do. And now, I'm not waiting anymore. I'm watching. Today I live in a second-floor apartment on the edge of Mechanicsburg, just 20 minutes from the courthouse where I once worked, a world away from the garage where they left me to freeze. It's not grand, just 2 rooms, a small kitchen, and a soft chair by the window. But it is mine, and I didn't find it alone. Angela, my granddaughter's daughter, found it for me. She's 22 now, in her final year of nursing school. She was the one who drove me here after the protective order went into effect. She unpacked my suitcase, brewed my tea, called me Grandma again, like the title had never been taken from me. You're safe now, she told me. For the first time in a long while, I believed her. She visits 3 nights a week. We make soup, play dominoes. Sometimes we just sit quietly. I love that silence. It does not bruise. It heals. After the media quieted down, I was invited to speak on national television on a program called Voices of the Forgotten. At first, I declined. But then Angela said, Grandma, someone out there is still sleeping in a garage. So I said yes. I wore my navy blouse, sat tall, spoke clearly. I don't hate my son, I said. I mourn him. I mourn who he used to be. But I'm not here for punishment. I'm here for prevention. The segment aired 2 days later. The station received thousands of emails. Some offered support, others donations. But the one that struck me most said this: I believe you. And now I believe myself. That's what justice and silence is, really, about. Not revenge, not noise, but restoration. The kind of truth that rebuilds a woman who is left out in the cold and reminds the world that silence is not weakness. It is memory. It is evidence. And sometimes it becomes law. If this story moved you, if it made you clench your jaw or blink back tears, or whisper "me too" under your breath, Then stay with us. Subscribe to The Art of Revenge, because wisdom never retires, and revenge it doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers from a chair by the window, and when it speaks, the world listens.